Hi guys, so I'm here in Franklin, Tennessee at the Carter House, and I just met this gentleman over here who knows an awful lot about history, and I just wanted to let him speak about it. Can you tell me a little bit more about this place?
All right, so my name's Will Pogue. I am the gift shop manager. I'm also one of the docents that works here at the Battle of Franklin Trust. We currently manage 3 different sites in the Middle Tennessee area, but the Carter House here was a farming family's home. They established this farm around 1829 to 1830. By 1860, they were running nearly a 300-acre farm here. It was very profitable at the time. When the Civil War hits, Middle Tennessee was a little divided. You see that in the family because the father, Fountain Branch Carter, who runs and owns the farm, is what we would call a Jackson Democrat. He basically would not have supported secession. However, his 3 surviving sons at that point, Moscow, Todd, and Frank, all joined the Confederate Army with a unit that was mustered out here in Franklin.
Let me stop you a little bit there.
Yeah.
You mentioned a so-called Jackson Democrat. You're mentioning former President Andrew Jackson?
Correct, yes.
And what does that mean when you say Jackson Democrat?
So Jackson Democrats were basically people who would have been born right at really the start of expanding into the country. And Jackson himself was very much a supporter of the idea of America as a union, as one cohesive republic with democratic values. And he didn't believe that secession, leaving the Union to form your own country, was really acceptable or not even acceptable, but it really wasn't an option because you wanted to keep the Union together. That was where our strength lay as a country. And so when you have someone like Fountain Branch Carter, who had been born in 1797, he would have grown up hearing stories from his father, from his father's contemporaries, of the Revolutionary War, of living under the British Empire as they lived under tyranny. And then as America came to be, he would have had very strong, I'm not going to say nationalist tendencies, but tendencies towards preserving the Union as something unique, something different, something that should be held to.
And this is important because from what I remember in history, correct me if I'm wrong, is ultimately back then you had essentially a Hamiltonian versus Jeffersonian ethos, right? You had people that really wanted to keep things simple, maybe not have such a strong national government, versus people that really did favor quote unquote states' rights, which were really at the time colonial, just having your own colony with your own currency and staying in your own backyard.
Oh, definitely, definitely.
Is that something that's correct?
Yeah, and so that's where you start to see a bit of a split occur during the Civil War, is you have these people who are more focused on the rights of the states, the autonomy of the states, as opposed to people who understood that the states were separate but still joined together as part of that union. And so Fountain Branch would have been more of, I guess, one of those people that sees the union as a whole, made up of states, whereas you have most of your Confederates, most of your people who join the Confederate Army, seeing the states as their own entities that are part of the Union but separate in that they can make their own decisions. They can be autonomous in their decision making.
So when we talk about the Confederacy and when you see a Confederate flag, what does that represent to you in historical context?
In historical context, the Confederate flag, and there are multiples, there's first, second, third national, which were all used as part of the government. What most people consider the Confederate flag is the one with the X through the center with the stars.
The Dukes of Hazzard flag?
Yeah, Dukes of Hazzard, yeah. So that is the battle flag. Historically, that was a flag that was flown by all the Confederate armies by 1863. It symbolized them as a fighting unit. Historically today, it has some negative connotations because it was used by movements in the South during the 1950s and 60s to kind of symbolize a white supremacist movement. And so there's historical connotations during the Civil War. It represents the armies. Much later, it starts to pick up some negative connotations.
But you mentioned there's more than that one flag.
Correct, yes.
So there's a couple more?
Yeah, so there's what's called the Stars and Bars, which was the first national flag. There's the stainless banner, which is a white flag with a little X.
Do you have a copy of that somewhere? If you don't, that's okay. We'll look it up online.
I think I have some patches out here, actually. If you don't mind, I'll grab some. And I'll try to show you as best I can. There's one.
It's really the battle flag?
So that is the second national flag. That's
second
the
national flag.
Banner. I apologize. Let me dig through here a little bit more. Here is the third national, which is called the Bloodstained Banner. That one was really only flown for about a couple of weeks before the Confederacy surrenders at the end of the war, and the First Nationals over here. So this is your First National flag. This is what they call the Stars and Bars.
Beautiful.
And then, of course, you have, when you're looking at this flag, you know, you can kind of see the little cross in the corner. That is what most people call the Confederate flag, but that's just, this by itself would just be what they call the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia initially. Later, it's adopted as the overall battle flag for the Confederate government. So
when we talk about the Confederate flag, first of all, there's three of them.
Yeah.
And the one that's popularized in popular culture would be the battle flag.
Correct.
And so what that means for you is, aside from the battle flag portion of it, why would there be multiple flags? Is it something that emphasized their own sort of union, but separate from the union?
Well, yes and no. So part of it is just convention, and part of it is meaning. So, for instance, when they do the Stars and Bars here, that was their first national flag that they kind of created to symbolize what their government stood for. The colors mean different things. The stars represent different states. And,
you mentioned the colors. What do the colors mean?
well, that's one of the things that I'm not 100% on.
Okay. I'm sorry I put you on the spot there.
No, it's quite all right. One of the things I will tell you, though, is that they start going into battle. Okay, at the very first part of the war. And people would look for flags because you would have regimental flags and you would have overall army flags. So that was kind of how you figured out where you were going, what you were supposed to be doing, who you followed. People started seeing this flag and they started saying, oops, that's a U.S. flag. The U.S. soldiers rally to that flag, and then they run into Confederates, and the Confederates would see the U.S. flag and they would run to those colors, and they would end up getting into a bit of a pickle. So the Confederate Army goes to the stainless banner, which was the one right over here, and I'll just hold them up. So they go to this flag here.
Which was a much different look than the one we just looked at.
Definitely. And then the problem they run into this is they carry this throughout the majority of the war, from about late 62 until right into 1864. The problem is when you see this unfurled all the way out in the open, it's pretty clear as to this is a national flag. When the wind's not blowing, it looks like you're surrendering. And so that created
it would be a white flag, the universal
Yeah.
symbol for surrender.
So then they come out with this flag about 3 weeks before the end of the war. This is called the bloodstained banner. They added the red stripe so there wouldn't be any confusion on surrendering. Unfortunately, the Confederates really never get to fly that flag in any official capacity, because 3 weeks before the end of the war, the Confederate government has moved out of Richmond, Virginia. They're on the run. It's just a matter of time before the Confederacy is surrendered by Lee at Appomattox. There's some subsequent surrenders of different armies.
And that would be on the Potomac with Grant and General Lee?
Yes. So Lee and Grant's one of the first major surrenders to occur. That's when the beginning of the end's really happening. Then you would have the surrender of the Army of Tennessee, which is the army that fought here at the Carter House. That particular army surrenders on April the 29th of 1865. And then you would have some surrenders that occur in May or even into June of 1865, just because it took that much time for Confederates to get the word, okay, the war's over, the government doesn't exist, we're fighting for a government and a cause that no longer officially exists. So they would get this word and they would basically be like, okay, let's pack up our stuff and go home.
So ultimately, when they had that summit with Robert Lee and General Ulysses Grant, that was not the end of the war.
No, not at all. Really and truly, to a lot of the soldiers, Appomattox was just kind of a place and a day. When they lose Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh, again, I apologize. I said the Potomac. It has nothing to do with the Potomac.
No, not at all.
That would be General Washington way back then.
Yeah.
Thank you for correcting me.
No, quite all right. Once you have Lee's army surrender at Appomattox, that's really what we kind of call the end of the Civil War, but really and truly you would have units that just surrender after the fact as they get word. So really and truly you could say the war roughly goes on for 4 years, from April of 61 at Fort Sumter to April of 65 at Appomattox. There are still units surrendering after that. Really the end of the war, I think, comes when the Confederate government no longer exists. Jefferson Davis is at Fort Warren in Boston, Massachusetts, where he's held as a prisoner. And then you start to see Reconstruction develop in the South. And I think that's when people really figured out that the end was here and that we're about to move on and we're going to go back to the way things were.
Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. I'm happy to share.